Today's episode, I'll be talking to Freddy Hart. Although he's not a Muslim, I decided to go ahead and do this episode because I just wanted to see how similar we are in terms of our beliefs and our belief systems, and to see how he operates his marketing agency along with his faith. It's interesting because I think many of us in the world, in the Western world, we tend to segregate both, business and faith. And there are some of us who are actually wanting to integrate the two. Not to say that either one is right or wrong, but it's interesting to note and to see and to learn from others. So I'll leave this episode to you guys to decide.
I want to say thank you, Freddie, for being such an inspiration for me. Initially, when we first started filming the pod in general. Because when I interviewed Ali Jamal, that was one of the first times where I saw a professional team actually film, a guest, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna wing it and see what happens. And it's those incremental changes and learnings that we see that actually make a big impact. And I just want to say thank you, first of all, for that.
I appreciate that, man.
But I want to start you off with the inaugural question of the pod, which is, how are you really doing today?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. Wife is healthy. Business is going well. My spiritual life is good, so I'm doing well.
Awesome. So I guess let's start with your backstory a little bit. What were the early influences in your life that shaped your path, both in ministry and in marketing?
Yeah, so ministry, I always grew up in the church. I've always been a devout Christian. And it's just been one of these things where it's like when you realize it's a part of your life and you see the positive nature of it, there's a benefit there. So like one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible is train up a child in the way they shall go. But I think the cool thing about that scripture as I got older is there's a clear difference between training somebody to do something and forcing somebody to do something. And I think that when you train somebody, they already see the value. And so I saw the value in the Word of God and reading the Bible in my parents' life. And so from there, it just kind of stuck. And so when I left college, even more of a backstory, I was training for the NFL. I didn't get an opportunity. And so I was trying to kind of figure out what was next. And so one of my friends in high school named John Patterson called me, and what was happening was John was doing ministry at South Gwinnett High School, and he called me and he said, look, I'm getting ready to move, I believe it was to North Carolina. And he was like, there's an opening, and I think you'd be great for it. So from there on, I got involved in ministry, not only at the local high school, but at the church as a whole. So that's kind of how I got involved in ministry, really from the beginning. As far as the marketing perspective, again, going back to not being unsuccessful and not getting the NFL contract, I had to figure out what was next. I had 2 degrees. I just finished my master's degree. And everybody at that point is telling you, okay, look, the football stuff is over. You need to go get a job. And so it wasn't that I didn't want to work a corporate job. I tell people this all the time. As an entrepreneur, social media will tell you that a corporate job is the worst thing in the world. I 100% disagree with that. I just knew that I personally wanted to do something different. And so whether it was training kids at the gym I was at, flipping stuff on eBay, I enjoyed the rush of entrepreneurship. But
I'm the same. The same. Just a little bit of backstory about me. And sorry for
No, you're good. You're good.
I remember when I was a child, I don't know why, but it was, a 9 to 5 to me was horrible. Why? It was because my dad could never spend time with me unless it was the weekend.
Okay.
Because my dad would go usually to work at 4 a.m. and come back at maybe 3 or 4 p.m. in the evening.
Okay.
And would sleep in the evening, and I would barely get to see him, and then only on the weekends would I ever interact with him. It's like, you know what? I don't like working a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like that, or working early in the morning, and then, because the availability that I craved,
Right.
I wanted that attention from my own dad, and I would never get it. But I appreciate what my dad did,
Right.
because without that, I wouldn't be who I am today.
Correct.
Right.
And so for me, I always tell people, it's funny. Everybody has a reason why they get into entrepreneurship. For me, it wasn't even necessarily about I wouldn't say that a 9 to 5 wasn't for me. The only thing that was different from a 9 to 5 versus entrepreneurship was I always enjoyed being able to put in extra time and extra effort and seeing the result. And so I know that from a corporate perspective, whether you put in 8 hours a day or you go home and you put in another 8, which is 16, the rewards that you reap, which a lot of times is monetary, is the same. Where it's like, for me, to this day, if my wife is coming home from the hospital, I'll be somebody who literally, I'll be on the computer learning about new things with technology, new things about AI, new things about business. And I know that those extra hours that I'm putting in allow me to scale my business as a whole.
All right. So when you were growing up, did you always, I mean, I guess you envisioned yourself to be a football player.
Right.
At the end of the
Well,
day, right?
actually, not necessarily my whole time growing up. I didn't start playing football till I was a junior in high school.
Okay. So then what was it before that? Like what did you envision to be?
I either envisioned, the two things I think I told everybody was I either wanted to be a lawyer or I wanted to be a detective for the Special Victims Unit, because I was a big Law and Order SVU guy. And so
Okay.
like my undergrad is actually in criminal justice.
Oh, wow.
And so like those are the two things I thought I wanted to do. And so after I got my master's degree and the NFL stuff didn't work out, I actually contemplated for a little bit going to law school during that time. So it was always, I always found like the aspect of helping people really important. I always found the aspect of like, when I was in middle school, to give you context, I used to get picked on a good bit. And so when I started to grow and I started to get really strong in the weight room in high school and college, I took pride in not only the hard work I was putting in, but like if somebody needed me to like, if I saw somebody in public and somebody was talking to them crazy, I never had an issue of like confronting them in front of everybody. And so that I think relates to like the criminal justice law aspect, where it's like somebody needs help, nobody's really there to help them. I want to be the person who can come in there and help them and kick down the doors and really be the jerk who's like going to confront the situation, because a lot of times people don't necessarily have that at their disposal.
Of course. I mean, there's so many people who don't have a person that could protect them, right?
Right.
And then also, I guess maybe it's strange that you mentioned that, because I have had similar experiences in my past as well, where like somebody's bullying someone else and I would go fight for that kid. Because even though I may be smaller or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's like what was right to do, and I don't know why that sense of justice existed at that time. I mean, because some kids have it, some kids don't. I don't know what cultivates it.
Right.
Right. But it's interesting. I did have a question though. I mean, like, usually, so well, criminal justice is one piece of it, but how did you get into ministry?
Yeah.
I mean, like, although you're studying for pre-law and football is an option here. How did ministry even come about in this scenario?
So after college, when that guy gave me the opportunity to be the chaplain, I'm the chaplain for South Gwinnett football. I've been doing it. I've done it for the last 7 seasons. And so I got that opportunity, and I got that opportunity through working with a nonprofit. And so ironically enough, part of my job working with the nonprofit was I had to go talk to churches to see how they could partner with the nonprofit. Well, the first church I went to go talk to, I sat down with the pastor. His name is Brian Boyles, and you'll see how the story kind of unfolds. He was like, let me think about how we can figure out a partnership, because like we talked for like 30 minutes. He was a super cool dude. And so like the next time I went to meet him, I heard they were like, hey, Brian just wants to meet with you and him. So I'm thinking either I said something wrong or like something went on. And he basically said, here's the deal. I see what you're doing in the community. We need somebody like you on our staff. So we'd love to give you a job here. And at the time I didn't have a job. So I was working with a nonprofit, but at the time I was like, no, this is awesome. Like I get to still be close to South Gwinnett. I get to form these partnerships. But I'll tell you, one of the hardest things about nonprofits is raising your own salary. And I wasn't good. I could probably raise funds now, but at the time, being 23, I wasn't. That was probably the most nerve-wracking thing ever. So it was like one of the biggest aspects of doing the ministry work was removed, and then I could just focus on connecting people, being like the liaison between the church and the local high school. It was awesome. So I started doing that. So that was the part of ministry. So now I'm at the church to this day, and I work in the communications. I'm in charge of the communications. My direct report is the number 2, and I've been doing that since 2019 as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from your upbringing that still guide you in your career today? Like any sort of key key moments
Yeah,
or key
so-
ideas that still show a thread today?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So I always tell my parents this, and they always laugh. I say I get my swag from my mom, but I get the ability to talk to people from my dad. And so my dad has a kind of cool story too. For context, he was born in New York, moved to Jamaica when he was 2 years old. Oh no, moved to Jamaica when he was 2 years old, and then he lived there until he was 18, and then he came back to Dunwoody, and so he was really all over the place. Where like he lived in Atlanta, he he lived in like, I guess the hood part of Atlanta, but like he had a corporate job. And so if there's one thing that's always been good about my dad is my dad knows how to communicate with all types of people. So that was one thing that I saw. And so I just learned that like, regardless of the situation, you're going to have to learn, if you want to be something special in life, you're going to have to learn to communicate with people. And then what my mom always taught me is you always have to have confidence in who you are. And so for me, I think a lot of times what happens is people don't want to get put in odd predicaments where they don't know the type of people they're working with or talking with. Yeah. My mom was really the one who gave me the framework and said, look, regardless of the situation, if you want to go somewhere in life, you got to have that swag about you, like you deserve to be in the room. So it was like that plus that really mixed, and those were the things that I took. And then it's like little things with my dad, like he always said, try to remember people's names when you first meet them. He's a big guy too. He's about 6'3", about 250 pounds.
Wow.
He may be less. He's been training pretty hard recently. But he always said, like, look, when you talk to kids, either get down on a knee or squat down. Like, don't try to be intimidating. When you're in a conference room or a business meeting and it's getting like edgy, he said, don't stand up as a big guy. That can come across as intimidation. So it's just like all those little things that I think change the game.
Wow. So we're gonna.
1 second, pause. I know. Am I tapping the table too much?
It's all good.
Okay.
It's all.
I know not to tap this.
No, it's not a big deal.
Okay.
I can actually take it out.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure. I saw you looking, so I just wanted to make sure.
It's all good. Man.
Okay.
It's all good. Okay, so I actually wanted to ask you, what was your first exposure to marketing and business strategy? Was it, through ministry, or like how did it come about? And was there a moment that you realized that this was something that you could master?
So, right around the time that I was doing ministry, like I said, I had to figure out what I was going to do for work. And so I just really got ingrained in like the ability to market and to make money. And so one of the stories that I tell everybody about, when you play football, Ross is the place to get football cleats. I don't know if it still is today, but like you could find cleats that are $120 for $20 in Ross. Like that's
I think it still is Ross or Marshall.
Yeah, like that's the go-to. And so at the time I had a little bit of money in my bank account, and there was 10 pairs of football cleats, and they were $10 each. I went online and I saw that they were $100 a pair. So what I did is I bought all of them, and by selling them on OfferUp, eBay, everything, I made like $900 in 6 hours. And so at the time, I was playing football in college, so I didn't have experience in the job market, but I had a master's degree. So with that kind of combined, I could make around $40,000 a year. So that's about $20 an hour. So for a full hour's work, with a guarantee, I could make $800. $800 in a week with security, $900 in 6 hours, but I got to hustle. That was kind of the route I took. And so during that phase, whether it was training kids online or whatever, I just learned about personal branding and creating social media content. And from there, I was able to get training clients. And then I actually started a Christian t-shirt line. And through marketing online, through affiliates that you could say, like I learned all that stuff. And I was able to make about $2,500 a month just off of all of my independent ventures. Wow.
But then I was going to stop you there for a second, because you just said, wait, you just started a Christian clothing brand.
Yeah.
So how did that even come about?
So I'm trying to think. So I was always, that's how it came about. I was trying to figure out how far back I had to go. In my undergrad, in my sports, so I had to take electives in college, and one of my electives was sports marketing. And so the last project of the semester was, okay, you have to create a sports business. And so I created this thing called Confidence 924 Athletics. And so it was a gym facility, a training facility, apparel facility, all of this stuff. And when I got done with the project, the professor, Dr. Hooper, I actually met one of Dr. Hooper's mutual friends recently. He said on the rubric, "This is the best presentation I've ever seen in all of my time teaching this class." And so it wasn't necessarily a big thought then, but it was, okay, this is cool that he liked this. Fast forward, all of a sudden, I was like, I learned that creating your own apparel isn't necessarily as much of a hurdle as people realize. And so I just started, we knew a family friend who would print vinyl apparel. And so what I did is I bought some clothes and I got the logo printed and I just started wearing them to the gym. And when I started wearing them to the gym, everybody was like, "Oh man, that's dope," because it was the word confidence, but instead of the I, it had the number 1, and then underneath it had 1 Corinthians 9:24, and that scripture says, "Don't you know that all run the race, but only one receives a prize? Run that you may obtain it." So the concept was you have to have confidence that you're number 1.
Yeah.
So I'd wear it around the gym, and everybody would be like, "Man, I like that shirt. I like that shirt. I like that shirt." And so I was like, okay, like if everybody's saying they're liking it, like
They might want to buy it.
yeah, we might want to buy it. So that's kind of when I had to learn like the game of e-commerce. That's kind of when I learned it, where it was like, okay, I gotta source t-shirts and then I gotta print them. And like in the beginning, I would literally get an inventory sheet of people who were interested, and then I would go to Walmart. I would find all the blank t-shirts, I would load them up, and then I would drop them off at the apparel presser, and then they would give them to me, and then I would package them up myself and then take them to the post office. So like that's originally what it was, and then it started to grow a little bit more and more. It took a back seat whenever I started working a corporate job, and then the agency grew. But I have people to this day ask me like whatever happened to it. So I'm looking to try to possibly towards the middle of this year have it make a little bit of a comeback.
Okay. So you're going to revive it.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
So coming back to the original question that I posed, sorry about that.
No,
a
you're
little
good.
bit of
You're
a
good.
divergence. So that was your first exposure essentially to business, marketing, and strategy
Yeah.
to a degree. Because you're experimenting, you're seeing, you're learning, you're observing, and then you're adjusting based off of the market conditions. And I guess, is that when you figured out that, hey, this is something that I could do, or that I could master this? Or like, was that later down the road?
I thought I had a knack for it because I knew how to communicate. I think it's Warren Buffett who says like, you'll be valued more in the market if you know how to communicate. It's one of those quotes. And so at the time, I knew that my uncle and my grandfather have a manufacturing business in the Tucker area. And so at the time, I knew that they didn't have necessarily a marketing team there. So I went to work for them in 2019. And so I started working for them. This is where the story gets kind of like it gets really cool. So I start working for them. I'm working in the ministry. One of my jobs was to find community partners. One of the community partners was the local owner of a Chick-fil-A. His name is John Starr. It's one of my good friends to this day. So I talked to John Starr. I'm talking to him about business, talking to him about all this stuff. Go back to the family business. My job was to to schedule and prep a photo shoot. So we had somebody who quoted us like $5,000-$6,000 for the photo shoot, and I was like, "There's no way on God's green earth that like it should cost this much." So he was like, "Well, if you can figure out how to make it cost less, make it cost less." So connected with a photographer. I think he charged me like $400 for the photos. I'm talking to John Starr. John Starr at the time, he has 4 kids now. At the time, he had 3 boys and he had a wife. And I said, "Look, this is a crazy request," but I said, "My uncle is doing a photo shoot, and I think your family looks great. I'd love for you guys to be the models in the photo shoot." And he was like, "No, bro, absolutely, I'll do that." And I was like, "Okay, great. Now I just need to find a house in order to do the photo shoot." And he was like, "Bro, you can use my house too." So then that eliminated both aspects of it. And then while I was there, I was like, look, in life, you got to take chances. So I created like a social media plan and like ideas of content that I could use, that he could use for his store. And so as we're talking about the photo shoot, I show him what I've created. And then from there, he was like, "Well, come in and like have a meeting with me and we can see how we can work together." So at the time I thought it'd be cool to work with people, but I didn't necessarily have an idea of like a full blown business. And so I met with him. And then after that, he was actually my first client. that I got to work with as far as being an agency. Around that same time, I went to a political client of mine named Reginald Scandrett, who's the sheriff of Henry County, and he was having his campaign kickoff. I was just there being my grandpa was like his mentor, so I was just there for moral support. So he asked me what I was up to, and I said, well, I'm working in marketing and social media, and I help businesses because I was getting ready to help John. And he was like, well, look, give your contact information to my wife. We may need you. I don't think we 100% will. I think we have somebody on the staff, but just in case. I was like, okay. A month later comes by. He's like, hey, can you come by our house to talk to us about this social media stuff? And so from there, that was my first political client. So it all like, and my grandpa used to preach at the church that the sheriff went at. So it's like being part of ministry almost shaped and formulated like the business as a whole. And that's kind of like how it all came together.
It's so strange you mentioned that because like even the podcast itself.
Yeah.
Like, although I'm not Christian, I am Muslim, right? And it's called Diary of a Muslim Entrepreneur. It's by being involved in those settings that allow, like in a mosque or in like gatherings of some sort, like Georgia Muslim Chamber of Commerce or maybe whatever other kind of gathering may exist. It's those kinds of gatherings that puts your name out there for people to finally know what you actually do.
And I think the thing about it is whether you're a Christian, whether you're Muslim, when you have religion in your life, unless somebody is going to those meetings solely for business opportunity, like you can see that a mile away.
Oh, of course.
But like I know for me, whenever I connect with other Christians and we don't lead with, hey, we're both Christians, let's do business, but we find that out about each other. You could probably say the same about like when you talk to other Muslims, like you know that there's a moral standard there that's going to be upheld in the process.
I mean, that's the way we figure that part out is we go to a mosque multiple times, right? The people who go there multiple times are the ones you really want to do business with, right? Because usually they're the ones that actually have that God consciousness. They're the ones that actually, hold themselves to a higher standard, right? Praying consistently. And then the next step would be, of course, talking to them, right? Understanding what kind of character, conduct that they actually have, right? It's similar to like figuring out who do you want as a spouse, right? The idea is the same. It's just maybe a bit. Well, it's in the same vein, just different kind of depth. Right.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's why if you see, I've always noticed for the most part, if you see somebody involved with their religious affiliation and they're outspoken about it from a business perspective, for the most part, there are exceptions, but for the most part, it allows you to see what type of moral compass they have, and that can help you in business more ways than one.
Of course. Have you had any specific mentors or experiences that, mentors or experiences that have like helped you merge both the faith and marketing expertise? Like, or I guess the better way to view this would be like, do you have mentors in marketing and mentors in faith that help you merge the two together? And how do you actually reconcile the two in business?
Yeah, so I know that I have from the faith side, I have what's called accountability partners. In the Christian religion, we call them D groups, discipleship groups. And so these are guys that you can talk to about anything, your struggles, everything, and they'll hold you accountable. And so I have that side. And then from the business side, I have mentors that like I've been able to pull pieces and aspects from their business journey. Like, for example, when I was working, I still work with the sheriff, right? And so one thing I learned with working with the sheriff is Shaquille O'Neal. I work with Shaquille O'Neal in Henry County. Oh, really? And I have that opportunity. Yeah. Wow. So the cool thing about it is working with Shaquille O'Neal's team, the couple of times I've had to work with them, their attention to detail is very specific. So I was able to pull that piece and add that to my business and understand that attention to detail is key. When it comes to working with Ali, one thing that Ali is very meticulous about is creating solutions, being able to manage activities, and being able to discuss results versus just vanity metrics like a lot of other businesses do. So I pull that from him. One of my good friends named Todd Price, right? He exited his roofing company for 8 figures. Wow. But one thing I learned about him is like, look, this is how, one thing that I took from him, and the other guys have it too, but one thing I took from him is here's how you build a culture of people who are willing to run through a brick wall for you. right? And it's the same thing on the ministry side, on the faith side. It's my buddy John Starr. It's like I believe now he's 37 or 38. But like here's how you can be a young man who's a husband and a successful business owner. There's older people that I have in my life who have been successful in business. It's like here's how you leave a legacy in business. So like just picking all those pieces and then mixing it in ministry, I think is the key. But I know for me, as far as like the ministry and business, I look at my business as ministry, right? One of my favorite Bible scriptures is Romans 12, 1 and 2, and it talks about being a living sacrifice. And I think one thing that I've always done is I don't necessarily shout from the mountaintops as soon as I meet somebody that I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, because my thought process is, some people disagree, some people agree, is that if you can't tell through my actions, it doesn't matter what I say.
Yeah.
And so I've learned that through my business, but just mixing it all together, I think that it helps from a moral perspective. It helps from a conversational perspective. And I know that every day I do my devotions, God does something in my life to where if I'm having struggles in business and life, whatever, I can go to the Bible every morning, and I can read it, and I can say, okay, God, I need your help. Send me an answer. And so I'm able to mix those two, because at the end of the day, like without my faith, I don't think my business is existent. So being able to bring them together is really what I believe has attributed to my success today.
No, I mean, I can totally see that, and I can agree to that too. I mean, like from an Islamic perspective, I mean, we have to pray 5 times a day, and we have an optional 2 additional prayers on top of that. So it can be up to 7. And I mean, usually I wake up early in the morning and I always ask God, can you give me this laundry list of things, right? It's my opportunity to speak with God to say, hey, I want this, 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 this. And it's just a matter of time before he answers my prayers, right? And it's very similar. It's just in a different form. So that's really amazing to see that, it does exist in different forms in different faiths, right? Or similar faiths, right? All right, so let's go on to the next set of questions, which was actually, I was doing a little bit more research on you, and the name of your company, the name stuck out a bit.
Yeah.
And you call it FR Hart 2 Enterprises.
Right.
So obviously your name is Freddy Hart.
Yeah.
I don't know what the R stands for, but
Yeah.
why the 2?
So I'm Frederick Ronald Hart II.
Okay.
So I'm named after my grandfather. And so my grandfather is a successful entrepreneur as well. And so his holding company is Frederick R. Hart Incorporated. So I wanted to create FR Hart 2 Enterprises.
Okay.
So I originally thought that this was going to be a holding company. But when I met with John Starr that day, he was like, how soon can you get started working with us? So it wasn't one of these things. I think a lot of times people will try to make sure that all their ducks are in a row as far as like getting started. I just got started. That was the name of the company. It started picking up steam, and I haven't changed it since. But the FR Hart 2 that people see on social media, that people see in my business, is because I'm Frederick Ronald Hart II.
Got it. It's very interesting you say that. It's like brain fart. Holy crap! What was I supposed to say? Oh well. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're good.
Let's see. So what were some of the early struggles that you faced when launching and scaling this particular business?
Yeah. I think I actually wrote this down. I write down quotes all the time on my phone, and I say, when you are first starting and really growing a business, you have to say yes to everything. When you're at a point where you feel like you're really good, you can start saying no. But self-awareness is the key determining factor in when you determine if you go from yes to no. And so one of the hitches I feel like that happened in my business, and I still deal with it now, is at first I would always go through phases of either wanting to do everything or wanting to delegate everything and not finding the happy medium, right? So when I first got started, and this is what I tell a lot of entrepreneurs, is I would hire out video editors, or I would hire out like people on Fiverr, and I would say like, I have a team of 6 people, I have a team of 8 people, and I would just say that to sound impressive. But I learned over time that if you do that, the problem is you put a false perception into the market of what you're actually capable of. So that was that side. But then on the flip side, there's also been hindrances where I have so much stuff to do and I'm not delegating properly that I get overwhelmed to the point where I get done with a whole entire business day. I look up, I still have a bunch of stuff to do, but there are no more hours in the day. So that was probably one of them. The next one is the ability to create processes. I think a lot of times what happens is people want to delegate what they're doing, right? But they don't do a good job of communicating the process. I heard somebody once say that there's 3 problems with all processes. There's either no process, it's the wrong process, or the process isn't being followed, right? And so the difference between the second 2 versus the first one is the fact that you at least have a process in place. But I think what happens a lot of times, especially when people are growing businesses, is they want to delegate things out, but they don't have a process to delegate things out. So they assume everybody's going to think like them. They assume everybody's going to work hard like them. And what ends up happening is the ball gets dropped. And when the ball gets dropped and there's no process or communication in place to get stuff done, people will blame the person in charge, which they have the full right to because there's no process. And so that's really, I'll tell you, that's probably over the last 18 months, that's been my big thing is like, if we do something more than 3 times in a week, let's create a process for it. Because if we create a process for it and something happens to you, we can still keep going. I tell people, Henry Ford invented the assembly line, I think, for efficiency. But I think the more important reason he invented the assembly line was because of scale. Because while the assembly line is efficient, what's even more efficient is if you can have one person build the entire car.
Yeah.
Right? But the scale aspect allows if the person putting the screws or lug nuts on the car gets sick, well, now you just get somebody else to put the screws and lug nuts on the car. So those are kind of some of the things that I had to deal with early on.
One good example that comes to my mind actually comes from the book Buy Back Your Time from Dan Martell. If you've ever read that book.
Yeah, for sure.
And in his book, he mentions that one of the things that he does is he basically does a Zoom recording, right?
Yeah.
And then transcriptize and then SOP or create an SOP, standard operating procedure, for whoever will be taking on that task, right? I've actually tried doing that.
Okay.
And it has worked. But I began to realize, you know what? I have to actually verbalize my thoughts and my thought process behind what I'm doing. Otherwise, if they don't understand the logic behind it, it's almost as if the chain breaks.
So here's what you can do then, because I ran into the same thing. Have you ever heard of Loom?
Yes.
So Loom has been a game changer. I could tell you right now, I think we have over 350 videos on Loom. Because whether a video is 1 minute long or it's 20 minutes long, you can get your thoughts out of your head and now people can hear you. So like, I agree with you. The transcribed SOPs are good, but when I started implementing Loom, Loom is great for everything because they can hear you talk about why you do stuff and how you do it and be able to scale.
Yep. All right. So next question I have for you here is, let's see. So how do you differentiate your approach from other marketing firms per se? And what role, I mean, obviously, does faith play a role in that differentiation to a degree?
Yeah, I mean, I think faith plays a role as far as a work ethic perspective. Like we're not, and I've gotten some flack for this before, not flack, but I've gotten some pushback from people where they say you need to charge for everything, right? Everything you do for a client, you need to charge for. Right. But I've learned, especially when it comes to like the foundation of my faith being important, that you can build a goodwill bank account by being a little bit humble sometimes and understanding that everything doesn't need to be charged for. And that's also been important. And that's been one of the things that's kind of led me in business is like understanding that. But I think what separates us from other marketing firms, in my opinion, is one, I believe that people don't buy from brands, people buy from people.
Agree.
So I focus on the people aspect. And then on top of that, the thing that I think that separates us is that everybody who works with me on my team is part of the execution process. We talked about it earlier, but before, assets were the value prop in marketing. So like, there was 3 companies who could probably shoot videos in all of Georgia, and they could charge an arm and a leg because if you didn't work with one of those 3 companies, you weren't going to have any videos. Then over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen that ideas and strategies have been the thing. So it's like assets such as videos, photos, emails have become the commodity, but the ideas and the strategies is what the value proposition is. Then came this thing called AI.
Yes.
And so what AI has now done, it has commoditized the ideas and strategy process. And so now the two things that separate all businesses are execution and brand. And so I feel like with us, we execute, we connect with people, and we understand how to build a brand, which brand you cannot measure from a metrics perspective, but brand is the most important thing when it comes to marketing, in my opinion. Because if you don't have a brand, what happens is everything else falls by the wayside, and over time, everything else becomes commoditized. So, like, for example, you've probably heard this before. Like when you talk to home service companies like contractors, how many contractors have you heard before say this exact phrase? We don't have the cheapest prices, but it's because we do great work. You hear that all the time from them, right? The issue you run into is that if 10 of you guys are saying that, eventually they're just going to go to the people who charge the cheapest, right? And so, like, for example, for contractors, you can either be the cheapest or you can be the most expensive. It plays you no benefit of being in the middle. And so if you want to be the most expensive, it's your brand that's going to separate you, right? It's a reason why people would pay millions of dollars for Ferraris and Lamborghinis and stuff like that. It's not because of the craftsmanship. It's because of the brand that they've established. And I think that that's where we focus on.
It's also status to a degree, right?
Right.
But in the case of, like, let's say, like a construction company, right?
Right.
It's like quality. I want quality work to be done, right? Or like you could even take an example of shoes, right? Nike on the premium end, and your normal Walmart private labels shoes, right?
Correct.
So completely get that. Let's see. Okay. So one of the things that entrepreneurs really struggle with sometimes is they struggle to maintain their integrity in competitive business environments. Especially, I mean, how do you ensure that your faith-based values guide your company's growth? I mean, like, those are things that sometimes, because I mean, ethics can come into play, especially in firms. Like, hey, I guess give us an example if you have one.
Yeah, like I know that there's some stuff that there's some companies that we won't work with, some industries, and I don't want to get too specific, but like I don't drink, I don't smoke, I really don't party. So like if it doesn't align, my thought process is always if I can't use the product or service that we're promoting, I generally will stay away from it just because like I want to be able to show the world what I'm doing, and if I can't show the world what I'm doing, then for me, morally, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, we'll work with both sides of the aisle in the political sector, but if somebody calls me, which I've had happen in the past, and somebody calls me and is like, hey, we'd love for you to come work with us, and I look at, like, some of the stuff that they're pushing, I'll say no because I want to be able to really be prideful in the work. The prideful is the word there. Have pride in the work that I'm doing. And so if it doesn't align with my moral compass, I'm not worried about it. But then I think that one thing that I've always noticed, especially in the Christian faith, is that people think that there's a difference. People think that humility and dominance are two separate worlds, right? And so I think a lot of times what happens is when people say, how do you stay competitive? I'm not saying that, like, you'll hear people say this, but like if my wife and I were running up the stairs and there was $1 upstairs to win, like I would shove her off the stair. Like I'm saying that, like, of course I wouldn't, but like I'm one of those competitors. And so I say that because I think a lot of times people think, I think what the world believes is that if you have faith, you can't be dominant. My thought process is if you have faith,
you are.
It's almost your obligation because you need to show the world what makes you different. And so for me, as far as being a competitive nature, like I tell people, like I have an ego, like I want to be the top dog. Like I almost played in the NFL. So like I have a personality about me that doesn't like to lose. And so like that has helped me in business, but I do it from a moral standard and moral compass that makes sense.
Yeah, that does, absolutely. Have there been moments where you ever felt that your faith and business objectives were ever at odds? And how would you reconcile them if you ever did?
Have I ever? Let me think. Yeah, sometimes there have been times where, like, you'll see what'll happen is I'll see really successful people in business, and I'll notice that like they're extremely transactional. And so, like, at first, for a little bit, you'll think that that's what you need to do in order to get to the level that they're at. But then for me, it's like, well, is it worth getting to the level that they got to, like
At the expense of others.
expense of
Yeah.
the others? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's the perfect way to put it. A great example of this is like the Netflix documentary about Vince McMahon, right? It's like he's now worth like $2 or $3 billion, and like he had good marketing ideas, but like when you look at all the stuff he did in the process, is the $2 billion worth it to get to that point? That's really my thought process.
I mean, there's also the moral quandary that someone has to live with, right?
Right.
And I think that's the bigger concern there, because what you do to achieve something, and if you feel good about it, I mean, it depends on what's morally positive. It depends on the perspective of the individual at the end of the day, too,
Right.
right? And if he doesn't feel conflicted, then obviously he's going to be okay with it,
Right.
Right? But if he does feel conflicted, then it's a hard thing to reconcile, and then it's to say how do you go back and say sorry,
Right.
And how do you fix all the things? I think it takes a man to actually say, hey, I'm sorry, and go back to the people that you hurt along the way. But I haven't seen the documentary, but I'll definitely watch it now.
Yeah, I mean, look, it shows you that he had great marketing ideas, but then like outside of the ring, like he had very questionable character in the things that he did. So, and ultimately, that's what got him kicked out, I guess, of his own company. So
What does success look like for you beyond financial metrics? I mean, because like faith-driven entrepreneurship, I mean, definitely involves a sense of purpose and just beyond making money. Because is that the? I mean, I don't think that's your purpose, obviously.
no, I don't think I don't think my focus at this point is growth, and it is hitting certain metrics. But I mean, my real focus is freedom and the legacy that I can leave. Like, I think the coolest thing is my dad's an architect, and he owns his own architecture firm. And so the cool thing about him is he'll go from idea, and then 2 years later he could see a house being built, right? And it's like the cool thing about that house being built isn't necessarily like just the process, but the cool thing about that is that house is going to be there for 10 to 15 years, right? Like, I enjoy being able to help companies and people put their brand out there, and then like see how it impacts other people, right? Like we both know Ali. It's always cool when we put out content for Ali, and then like somebody says, "Hey, I saw your video and it helped me when I was trying to negotiate my first deal," right? Like, to be a part of that to me is just like super fulfilling. So I want to continue to help more people with that process. My company's motto is making messages known. So the more companies I can help, the more CEOs I can help, the more executives I can help make their message known. That would be my ultimate goal. I want to help as many businesses, whether we're close up helping you hands on, or whether we're far away, whether it's consulting, whatever it is. I want to help as many businesses. I want to help as many CEOs who deserve to have their message out there, get out there and really make their message known.
Got it. So before we started the pod, you were briefly mentioning that you're actually going to be sharing a stage with Brad Lea, in March, I think, of this year, right?
Yeah. So
how did that come about? Because that's such an interesting thing. I mean, you get to be on stage with some of the biggest people on earth, or I guess heavily influential people on earth. So how did that come about?
So Todd Price is one of the guys I was talking about earlier. So Todd and I have a mutual friend, and we both used to train at the gym together. Like, this mutual friend, his name is Matthias, would train with Todd at this gym, and when I was in college, I would train with Matthias at this gym. So about 5 years later, I'm out of college. Me and Matthias go to lunch, and I was telling him what I was doing, and he was keeping up with me on social, and I mentioned one of his mutual friends, which was Todd Price, and he said, you should probably talk to him about marketing. So this was, I want to say this was like August or September of 2021. So like the business was just getting started. So I told Todd what I do. I say, hey, I'd love to connect. He said, meet me at my office. I walked into his office and I said, look, I have a team of people that I work with. This is what I do. I will help your roofing company and your supplement company. I'll do all this stuff for you for 6 months for free. At the end of the 6 months, though, I want to talk about like a long-term partnership. And he was like, bet, run it. So 6 months goes by. He loves everything we're doing. So then I handled the roofing side and then the supplement side and his personal brand. So then when he exited the roofing company and left the roofing company, he still had all these other ventures and people wanted to talk to him as far as coaching and consulting. So I helped him grow a coaching and consulting business. I handled the back end, the processes and all that stuff. One of his clients was like, hey, I want to throw an event, but I don't know where to get started. So Todd was like, look, Freddie and I will come in and we'll help you put on this event and we'll start doing business coaching events, summits, all this stuff. But we want to split it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I actually have a little bit, I think I want to say it's like 35, 35, 30 me. And the guy, his name is Derek Skubitz. He's the one putting on the event. He was like, absolutely, let's do it. So Todd exited his company for a lot of money. So Todd's pockets are a little bit bigger than mine. And he was like, look, I don't need you to really put up any capital. I just need you to make sure that this thing is a well-oiled machine. I'll let you speak on stage. We'll split the profits. And I'm going to do this for every business that I get ownership and equity in going forward. And so Todd was on Bradley's podcast, and Todd and I are both in a group called Apex, which is a mastermind.
Okay.
So Ryan Stewman isn't the head of Apex. He's friends with Todd, so that's how we got him to speak. And then Todd connected with Brad Lee, who are friends, and then he got him to speak as well.
That is so amazing.
So the five of us, March 28th in Chicago, that's how the Legacy Summit was born.
Wow. That's an interesting story.
Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, what kind of advice would you give to entrepreneurs who want to build a powerful network but may not have access to high-level connections?
So I think I actually talked about this in a video a while back. I think that you have to establish two circles when it comes to business and entrepreneurship. The first circle that you'll establish are people that are on your level and maybe a little bit lower than you that you can help up, right? Because in essence, when you're here, you're the big fish in a small pond. And these people can help you with your goals, and you have the same problems, and you have the same understandings. Now, you need to establish another circle where you're the little fish in the big pond, because that's going to allow you to grow. And the way that you get in here is you continue to get better and you continue to bring value. And I know that those are generic terms, but I think a lot of times what happens is people think there's a stigma out there that they think that successful people are just supposed to help people who are less successful than them. And from my life, I don't think that's true. I think that successful people, when they see other killers or they see other people who can grind when it comes to business, they're willing to help if you're willing to put into the effort. So I think the way that you do it is you go to people who are more successful than you and you say, here's what I have to offer. And when you show that you can over deliver on what you have to offer, they'll refer you to lots of people. I know I've mentioned Todd, I mentioned John Starr, I mentioned Ali. A large portion of my business has come from referrals from those guys literally saying, hey, I saw Todd's stuff. Hey, I saw Ali's stuff. I want you to do the same thing for me. Can we talk? So I think when it comes to establishing a network, this circle is good to help you with accountability, but to get into that circle with people ahead of you, you have to figure out some value you have. And value is not ideas. Value is not strategies. It goes back to what we said. Values is execution, right? Like these guys can use ChatGPT and figure out ideas, but they need people to execute them. And I think that two clear examples of this that I always talk about. Have you ever seen the show Ballers with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson?
Yes, I have.
So if you look at that show is a clear example of providing value, right? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson had the Hall of Fame career. He had the connections. So when he went to work with the financial firm, he got a job. When they wanted to buy the Kansas City Chiefs, they gave it to Dwayne. They gave it to The Rock first, and he went and got the financial resources and was able to buy the team because of the value he could bring to the people ahead of him. Same thing with Dana White. They bought the UFC for $2 million. He got 10%. He was the CEO and president and doing all the grunt work. But when they exited for $5 billion, the payout worked. So that's what I tell people.
Phenomenal. Let's see. So how do you stay authentic while navigating networking opportunities? Well, I think you just answered that question. Sorry. What are some practical steps entrepreneurs can take to establish themselves through as thought leaders in the industry, similar to what you've done, essentially to a degree?
I think the first thing is speak on experience, right? I think a lot of times what happens is entrepreneurs don't speak on experience; they speak on what they've read, right? What's in the market already. I always think of it like the gym. So you could go to the gym and you could talk to the guy who doesn't look very muscular and who's read every book about lifting weights, right? He can tell you everything in the books, but then you also go to the gym and there's a guy who's really not, he's not a jerk, but he's just not talking to anybody, but he's in great shape. That guy has shown you.
Yeah, he has the discipline.
He has the discipline, he has experience, he's put the reps in. So as far as developing yourself as a thought leader, figure out what you want to speak on that you've done, and then just speak on that and go in depth. Like you've seen, you follow me on social, like I don't really switch from the stuff that I'm talking about, but I just go more in depth about the stuff that I'm talking about. And so I think that that's a big thing that a lot of people could do.
I agree with you 100%. I think having a level of nuance that goes deeper and deeper and deeper into a subject matter allows that person to like flourish in a different and unique way.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why, like, when I created the pod, I actually had more of a finance tilt originally. The idea was, okay, how do we talk about Islamic finance? Because Islamic finance in itself is such a wide topic that, I mean, it's growing in the overall world. I think it's like it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the thing is, it hasn't even touched the United States.
Wow.
Or it's very little in the United States, in the billions, maybe about like 8 to 10 billion or so, a little bit more than that. But like overseas, it's multiple trillions of dollars, and nobody here at least has leveraged or utilized those ideas. Because in Islamic finance, we don't use any debt. We shouldn't use any debt, realistically speaking. So it's just an interesting idea, and just to piggyback on what you just said. You emphasize mentorship and community building in your work. How do you use your platform to uplift and support aspiring entrepreneurs?
I think the best way that you can do that is just being an open vessel. Like there have been plenty of times where like people will have questions, and like I said, one stigma that like I deserve, if I'm doing valuable work, I deserve to be compensated. But if somebody has a question about entrepreneurship, it's not always, hey, bro, if you want to talk, just pay this $97 for an hour and we can work. So like my goal is that my organic content strategy is a wealth of knowledge for somebody getting started. They have the ability to reach out to me and ask questions if they want. If I see the values there, I never have a problem with connecting people. That's a little bit more long tail though, because the worst thing that you can do too early on is start connecting people who don't have skills, and then it makes you look bad.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then it's really just being an open vessel for people who have questions about entrepreneurship. And then like I speak at high schools and stuff like that to like kind of teach the next generation about what I've learned. I can't speak on too much, but I mean, I've had a 5-year career, so I can speak on what I've learned during that journey.
Well, yeah, go for it if you want to speak a little bit more about it.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, what I tell them all the time is I just kind of talk to them about like the stigmas and stuff that they hear about entrepreneurship. Like every kid will tell you, or like every person will tell you, hey, I want to start a business, but I don't have an LLC yet. Hey, I want to start a business, but I don't have a website yet.
They have their own limiting beliefs, basically. They're just stopping them from actually doing the next step.
Right. And so like I tell them, hey, don't worry about that stuff. Like there's a saying, I forgot where I heard it, but there's a saying where it says, you either figure out how to balance a checkbook or you become so successful that you just pay somebody to do it.
Yeah.
So it's one of these things where it's like, if you learn the concept of business and collecting cash early, you can figure out all that other stuff, but you'll never figure it out if you don't get started. So that's one of the main ones that I talk to whenever like people have questions about entrepreneurship. And then the other thing that I talk to people about is not trying to be being different in the market is oftentimes what's going to help you. Like it's like that book called Blue Ocean Strategy.
Yeah.
And so it talks about that, where it's like, if you find this blue ocean of people, you'll be really good and you'll have a profitable business and a profitable opportunity. versus trying to be exactly like somebody else in the market. I think a lot of military guys who know business do a really good job with this, because whether it's military apparel, military supplements, military leadership coaching, they understand that there is a specific niche that is looking for what they have. And so I think that they benefit from that. So those are some of the things that when I talk to aspiring entrepreneurs, it's like, here's what you see on social media, but it's 100% not true. And here's what you actually need to do. But I'm not going to just tell you that. I'm going to show you how in my life that's actually been true and actually played out.
So just to circle back a little bit, have you ever really experienced any sort of crisis of faith in your journey, and how did you work through it? If you were running the business at the time, or through other moments in your life?
I don't think I've ever experienced a crisis of faith in the, like, really questioning, right? Because I think that I've always learned that if you ask God to give you patience, it's not going to be like a snap of the finger, you're a patient person. It's going to come through trials and tribulations where you actually get to like display those characteristics. And so for me, I've never lose faith, because I know if something gets good, that's when I thank God. If something's getting really bad, I thank him for the good he's given me, regardless of the situation. Because for me, my faith is what really sets the foundation for my business. So I know that regardless of what's going on, that's the one thing I need to keep strong.
There's a similar concept in Islam. I forget the exact Arabic translation for it, but whether it's good or it's bad, it's a blessing regardless.
Okay.
Why? Because if the bad didn't happen, you wouldn't become resilient in this way. If the good didn't happen, you wouldn't have what good happened to you anyways. Right? So it's interesting, like how some of these ideas and concepts, they're so profound and simple, but if we just think about it in a different perspective, right? It opens the mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And it allows you to then perceive things in a completely different way. So like one of the things that, I was recently listening to was, you should be grateful for the oxygen you breathe, for the trees that you can actually see that are green.
Yeah.
There's so many things that you can be blessed with and blessed for. Not blessed for, but blessed with, right? That we simply just don't recognize.
Yeah.
And it's simply having that perspective shift that allows us to hopefully become even more grateful and appreciate what God has given us at the end of the day. What are some key habits or daily practices that keep you spiritually grounded, despite the demands of entrepreneurship in itself?
I think consistently having my quiet time in the morning. So after I get up at about 4:30, and then I'll go to the gym at about 5. And then when I get home at about 6:30, I'll usually get ready for the day. Like I'll go shower, and then I'll have my devotionals. So I'll read a book of Proverbs, and then I have a devotional, whichever I'm reading, and then I'll pray to God. And so that's really been consistent. But then just understanding, like, having the accountability in the D groups and the accountability partners that I have, that's what really allows me to stay grounded. Because if you talk to somebody about your problems that like is close to you, they can give you insight that oftentimes you may not have. Okay. And so like for me, I'm not necessarily, I'm not all the way to the, I need to go to therapy 4 times a week, right? But I'm also not, I need to keep everything to myself, right? So there's finding that happy medium that works, and everybody's different, right? And so having those accountability partners that I talk to really allow me to be able to unpack things and understand things. Because, example, in entrepreneurship, if you have something that you're going through, sometimes you may think that you're the only person going through something. Whereas if you talk to somebody who's ahead of you, they'll tell you, oh, don't worry, I go through the exact same thing. Here's how I handle it. Okay, don't worry, that's not crazy. That's part of the process.
It's so funny you mentioned that. I interviewed a couple of gentlemen actually before you, and strangely enough, they had somewhat similar stories to some of the issues I faced in my life.
Right.
And it's like, wow, I didn't realize that this is the outcome of that struggle. And I'm thinking like, wow, I'm blessed. I'm really blessed, because like I didn't realize, I was actually walking into you could say a pile of diamonds, you could
Right.
say, right? And sometimes you struggle and you wonder like, oh, why did God put me through these positions in life? And it's like, oh, wow, oh, this is what he wanted to show me, right? Many entrepreneurs also tend to face burnout. How do you manage stress and maintain balance while running the business and serving in ministry simultaneously?
So I heard something in another mastermind I was in. It was called the Arte Syndicate, and one of the first lessons they taught us is about like excellence and exhaustion. And in the mastermind, they said excellence is exhausting. Whenever you get exhausted, just ask yourself, what do you expect? And so I learned that probably in early 2022. And that was a game changer for me because of the fact that when you understand it, I don't look at it as burnout anymore. I just look at it as part of the process. And so for me, I don't necessarily experience, in my opinion, burnout because I really love what I'm doing. I think what happens sometimes for a lot of entrepreneurs is they don't truly love what they're doing, or the self-awareness is there and they're not necessarily truly like really good at what they do. So it's like one of these things where it's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm very, very selfish with my time. So I'm only going to do things that are positive and that don't cause burnout, right? So like I'm not going to necessarily go out to events that don't make sense. I'm not gonna work with clients that give me absolute headaches, right? I'm gonna
So
do
you're gonna
stuff
you're gonna basically seek activities that actually give you energy,
right,
versus taking or sucking the life out of you to a degree,
right.
right?
And so I think that if you do that and you do it right and you get really, really good at what you do, from what I've seen from other people, again, I've been in this for 5 years, but from what I've seen from other people, if you focus on what you're really, really good at and what you can bring most value, and you become the best at it, the business will come in. Of
course.
And the great thing about it is all you have to do is focus on what you're really good at.
So I want to rewind a little bit here because it's a question I should have asked earlier, but it just came to my mind. Like when you were running FR Heart 2 Enterprises, who was your first hire, and was that a struggle for you to find a good hire? I mean, you initially mentioned that you had hired, via freelancing, right, through either Upwork or Fiverr or whatever else it may be. Was hiring your first employee a key thing that changed your business?
So yes and no. I didn't hire so all of my full-time people who work for me are virtual and they're outsourced.
Got it.
Okay, so I've got one in Pakistan, one in the Philippines, one in India, and one in Bangladesh. And so they handle a lot of the back end. That was I probably started doing that in mid to late 2023. Before then, I always had content like video editors and photographers who would get the assets for me, but I would contract them out. So those those were hires for projects, but those are guys who I regularly use for the stuff. And so that was a game changer for me in the beginning because when it came to getting a video, I now didn't have to be on the set to get the video when I was shooting. So that was the first one. And that was good. And that had its challenges at times as far as the communication aspect, but that's where processes came into play. That's where I said, okay, like I can't just say, hey, go get a video. If I'm going to edit it, I have to say, hey, I need these shots in order to make the video work. Right. And then as far as the back end, when it came to hiring the full-time people that are VAs, that was a huge game changer because now that was a lot of the monotonous stuff that took a lot of time that I didn't have to worry about anymore.
So like what would be that? Like billing, invoicing, that kind of stuff?
No, that would be like scheduling social media posts. That'd be like I used to build out a lot of funnels. So I have, again, those 300 Loom videos. I would teach them how to build funnels. I would teach them how to video edit. And it'd be like, what I do now is if I get the raw content from a videographer, right? I look at it, I analyze it, and then, I'll tell you the process. I look at it, I analyze it. I say, okay, this is how I want the project to look. I build it out in a whiteboard in Canva. I then do a Loom video. I talk about each aspect. I'm going back and forth from the Dropbox. I send them the Loom video. I send them the Dropbox, and then they edit it from there. They send me back the first draft. I'll sous chef it. I'll say, hey, add this here, add this here, add this here. And then they'll make the edits, export it, and then it goes to the client. Before, what would happen was I'd get the content and I'd pray and hope that I had a half a day or a couple hours to edit it. And if I didn't have half a day to edit it, I'd be in a real predicament. So being able to create those back end processes were good. But I think the biggest hurdle that I experience as far as like hiring and bringing on a team is understanding that the people don't think like me.
Yeah.
The people don't know what's in my head and getting it out of my head. So I used to get frustrated early on where I'm like, how come they didn't get that shot? How come they didn't get that shot? Where it's like, for me, I've always taken accountability, and it's like, no, this is my fault, right? Like, I let this happen. And so now it's more of, hey, I need this to happen. I need that to happen. I need this to happen from a tactical side. Yeah. I do believe, though, I will say that there are certain things in business that you can't teach. Like going the extra mile, you can't teach. Work ethic, you can't teach.
Yeah.
And so if I see that start to falter, then I just have to figure out a new solution, right? Like I always tell people, one thing that I tell anybody who works with me is I call it the $10,000 mindset method. And so I say, if you were getting paid $10,000 to do whatever, if you're getting paid $10,000 to film a podcast episode, if you're getting paid $10,000 to do a video shoot, whatever it is, what would you do to make sure that the experience was the best? Usually people say, like, I would get a haircut. I'd make sure I look professional. I'd get there on time. I'd follow up with the client. I'd make sure I do this, this, and this. And then you take a step back and you say, okay, 95% of the stuff that you just said is 100% free.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're not doing it now means that you're only doing this for the money. And so that was one thing that I had to like make sure I was communicating as I started to grow a team too.
It makes me think like, you know what? There's never a perfect time to do anything.
Correct.
Right? Whether it's to have kids, get married, do anything, like start a business. Like there's never a perfect time. And there's so many people that have this fallacy in their mind where, hey, I'm going to start a business when I have enough money and this and this and this. All my ducks are in a row. But in reality, that never happens.
Right.
That can never exist because no perfect moment in time will ever exist because humans are inherently imperfect, strangely enough, right? So why would we expect to have perfection? It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think that what happens is it doesn't get easier, right? Like one of the confusing things that I get all the time is like I started my business when I was 25 and I was doing it full time by the time I was 26. And people will say, well, that's awesome that you started. You know, I have a wife, I have kids. And I'm like, but there was a time that you didn't.
And you could have started it then.
And you could have started then.
But now that you do, you have that reality. You just move forward.
Right.
Keep trucking, right?
Right, exactly. 100%.
Right. All right. So what's next for FR Hart 2 Enterprises? How do you see your work evolving in the coming years, so to speak?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've talked about this before. If I look, I stopped looking at like my business life as far as like 6 months, 1 year. I kind of look at it in 5 to 10 years. And there's a couple things. I'd like to build a marketing infrastructure to really get heavy into the M&A space. And so I have partnerships and equity stakes in businesses now that are relatively small, but I'd like to get to the point to where I could create a marketing infrastructure to where if I can get a seller financed or sweat equity part of a business, put it through the marketing infrastructure and make it more valuable, I can kind of create like a almost like a fix and flip type deal for businesses. Yeah. So that's one thing. And then I tell people I'd really like to get into sports, like sports management, NIL stuff, because one, I played the game, so I understand that. And then two, there's an aspect of like, I think right now there's a lot of people in the sports management industry who don't know sports, who don't know business, and they're just in there and they're there at the right time. And so the way I see it, again, as a competitor, is I feel like with my skills and my hard work in the next 5 to 10 years, I can go in there and do some real damage as well. And then just really continuing to grow the agency and then really starting to, I want to start getting into the coaching and consulting space where it's like there are smaller businesses that want marketing help but don't necessarily have the resources to hire a full-time agency. How can I help them? How can I bring value to them? And so that's one thing that I'm looking to really get into specifically this year is like, for smaller businesses, how can I bring value to them to where they can see the benefits of what we do without necessarily having to invest a lot of resources to do it?
So, what's one piece of advice you would give to entrepreneurs who want to integrate their faith into their business journey?
I would tell them to do it. I would tell them it's the best thing you can do. Morally, it'll keep you disciplined. If somebody doesn't want to work with you because of your faith, that's probably
that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's probably not somebody you want to work with.
Yeah.
In general, and it'll keep you honest about the next moves you need to make. It's funny you said this. About 4 months ago, I got a cool job opportunity, like a client opportunity to work with somebody. And so, long story short, it was a great opportunity for me, but like for one of the business partners that I was going to work with, like in order to make it work, it was going to have to be kind of shady. And so like I was looking at it as first like, okay, like this could be really cool for my career and to like add this to the portfolio, but I don't know. And it was like, I went to church one day and my pastor preached a message about that. And I called the person I was supposed to work with on the deal. And I was like, right now, I don't think that this is a good idea. And then long story short, as of recently, there were certain things that showed us that pulling out of that deal was a smart thing to do. And so I think that if I wasn't faith-based, I wouldn't have gotten that gut feeling in my stomach to pull out from that situation. So that's kind of the way I look at it, is like it's a great foundation. And if you make it the foundation of your business, sky's the absolute limit.
Well, Freddie, it's been an incredibly insightful conversation. I appreciate your vulnerability, the wisdom that you have and the way you've seamlessly integrated, your faith in business. And before we wrap up, where can people connect with you, learn more about your work, and engage with your content?
Yeah, so the best way I tell people to engage with me is FR Hart. Hart is Hart on all social medias. LinkedIn is a great place. And then if you want to connect with me personally, it's frhart2.com.
Got it. And I'll definitely put down in the description down below so then people can also connect with you. And I appreciate it, boss.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you
problem,
so much.
brother.
Thank you.